It's my pleasure to welcome Congressman James Clyburn.
Thank you, Ashley, very much for introducing and hope presenting me here today. I'm always pleased to hang out with South Carolinians and those who want to be South Carolinians. Thank you so much for being here. Ed, so good seeing you again. Ed's father is a neighbor of mine down in Santee, where I hang out most of the time these days. Mike, thank you for bringing him, and thanks to my friends from the Farm Bureau for being here. I got a little nervous when they brought you to the mic. I thought you were going to be here for a while, but thank you for honoring your 2 minutes. Though that might have been a house 2 minutes. I don't know what that was. I want to talk to you just a little bit today. Usually I talk at these things about the challenge that we have within the state. He was mentioned that. Hey, Joe, where's Joe?
He just left. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Usually I talk about the challenge that we have in the state. And this today is going to be one that's more broad. But before I get into that, because I'm going to talk about some things that I don't usually talk about. I noticed that my grandson-in-law is here. Good to see you, Justin. He's a Mississippian. Because of some of the challenges I'm going to talk about today, my granddaughter, Sydney, is doing her residency at the Children's, I think they call it the National Health Center, or the Children's Hospital here. And of course, when she graduated high school, she got all these offers for college, and I was encouraging her to stay in South Carolina. In fact, her major, I think, was something called biochemical engineering or something, which was a big thing up at Clemson. And so I kind of pushed her to Clemson. And she sat me down one night and said to me, she says, Granddad, they've offered me at 110% to go to Mississippi State. I said, I'd never heard of that before. And that I've not been able to get anything better than 75, 80% in South Carolina. Now, can we make a deal for you to make up the difference? And I told her, I'll come visit you in Mississippi. So off she went. But it reminds me a little bit today of King's letter from the Birmingham City Jail. I don't know if any of you have read that letter, but I've read it about 100 times. And I'm going to read it some more if I continue to live. Because every day I run across something that reminds me of a part of that letter. I call that letter the most timeless document outside of the Bible that I've ever read. And there's a little part of King's letter that I want to share with you today. And it's just 3 words. Time is neutral. You may recall that when King was sitting in that jail back in 1963, he received a letter from 8 white clergymen, one of whom had South Carolina connections. And they said to King that they thought that he should leave Birmingham because his presence in Birmingham was disruptive. And they said to him that they thought that his cause was right, but his timing was wrong. And they went on to remind him how long it took Jesus to spread the word and other things that took time to accomplish. And King, after being refused paper to write on, King responded to that letter, writing in the margins of newspapers. And he wrote about the question of time. And he says, it's kind of strange how we deal with time. And we've heard it all of our lives. And then he said, really, time is neutral. Time is never right, and time is never wrong. Time is always what we make it. And then he went on with that thought and says that he was coming to the conclusion that the people of ill will in our society were making a much better use of time than the people of goodwill. And he thought that we are going to be made to repent in this generation, not just for the vitriolic words and bad deeds of bad people, but for the appalling silence of good people. The appalling silence of good people. Now, this morning, it was published that Peter Navarro, with whom I've had a relationship when I chaired the Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus, and was stonewalled by his office, and he eventually spent some time incarcerated because of that and other things. He's issued a statement this morning talking about how bad BMW is for South Carolina. Can you imagine? That was published this morning. How bad BMW is for South Carolina. I remember when I was trying to, when I first got elected, some of you remember back in 1992 when I was running, I laid out all these plans that I had for South Carolina, and most especially the 6th Congressional District. And in laying out these plans, I didn't know that Bob Royal, many of you remember Bob, who was Secretary of Commerce, but Bob and I were very close friends, still are. Bob called me the day after the election, and he said to me, I need you to stop by my office. He was then serving as Secretary of Commerce under Carol Campbell, and for $1 a day. We got to be close friends because one of the things about me that a lot of people don't know, I served for a little better than 12 years as on the banks that are the predecessor banks to what is now Bank of America. I was on the board of CNS National Bank. I was on the board of CNS Sovereign. I left the bank when I announced for Congress, and they became Nations Bank, and the letter later went out to California and bought Bank of America. And so I've had that relationship over the years. So Bob said to me, stop by the office. I need to share something with you. I went by his office, and he sat me down. He had his staff to prepare a big, point thing? PowerPoint presentation. I sat there as they went through all of this. And then he said to me, now, all those things you promised in your campaign, you aren't going to be able to do any of those things unless you solve the water problems in your congressional district. And he pointed to the center of that presentation, and there was an outline of the state of South Carolina. And he put the little spot right on the little town of Santee. He said, now, all of the stuff about the I-95 corridor being the corridor of shame, you can do something about that if you solve the water problems along I-95. Of course, that set me out to make a long story short. The result is the Lake Marion Regional Water Agency. that we've invested millions of dollars in. In that little, they call it resort, that I live in sometime, where Ed Bell's daddy probably named it that. They wanted to run me out of there. The people who would not speak to me, because that was a waste of taxpayers' money to put a water system at Santee. But I was not deterred, we did it. And when Volvo started looking, excuse me, BMW, but when Volvo started looking for a place, they came down to two states, South Carolina and Georgia. There's a little place right outside of Georgia, right outside of Savannah, Georgia, that they had picked to compete with South Carolina. South Carolina won. And they won on one condition: they had water. The Lake Marion Regional Water Agency was sitting there to provide the water. That's how we beat Georgia. Simply because, as my dad would say, if he were standing before you, the fundamentalist minister, where there is no vision, the people perish. Because of a lack of vision, the people along the I-95 corridor had suffered for years. And today, there are 900 permitted new houses being built in Santee as I speak. 900. That's on top of what's already been there. Why? Because the Volvo plant is sitting there. The fastest growing part of South Carolina today, and we're the fourth fastest growing state in the Union. And the fastest growing part of South Carolina right now is a little place called Nexton. And Nexton, I say, will soon be Nexton, South Carolina, with its own zip code. Why? Because of visionary leadership. Now, I'm going to share a couple other things too, and I'm answering the questions. Now, I know this is, I want you all to take a look at this, and I'm going to say something about this in just a minute. When I got elected to Congress back in 1992, took office in 93, South Carolina had no heritage corridors. We had no national parks, 0 national parks, 0 heritage corridors. At the time, the economy in South Carolina was being controlled by 2 T's: tobacco and textiles. They control the South Carolina economy. Where is tobacco today? Where are textiles today? They're off to Asia. They're in our past, not our future. I knew from my own studies that the future of South Carolina was in 2 T's: transportation and tourism. The fastest growing industry in the country is tourism. And the fastest growing section of tourism is heritage tourism. I maintain, to the chagrin of some of my friends from Virginia and Massachusetts, that South Carolina is the most historic nation or state in the nation. Everybody knows about South Carolina and the Civil War. We accept that. But few people know that some of, if not the most critical battles of the Revolutionary War were in South Carolina. not Virginia or Massachusetts, South Carolina. The most critical battle in that war, from my studies, was the Battle of Charleston. And we lost, there were 3 battles of Charleston. First 2 were lost. And Great Britain was about to enter that war when George Washington decided to send a guy named Nathaniel Greene from Rhode Island. You go out to Charleston today, and they'll take you down on tour, and they take you to Nathaniel Greene house and tell you what a great Charlestonian Nathaniel Greene was. Nathaniel Greene was from Rhode Island. Born in Rhode Island, buried in Georgia. He's not even buried in South Carolina. But his house is there, and he was a great South Carolinian. Why? Because when George Washington decided to get outside of his comfort zone, he'd been sending generals down to South Carolina, and they were not good generals. So he plucked this guy out of Rhode Island. By the way, he had a disability. He had a severe limp. And he sent him down to Charleston. And he won that 3rd battle. It turned the fortunes of the war. And so I saw all of these things, the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, the Reconstruction. I call in my 3rd book that's being released later this month, year rather. I'm going this month up to New York to sit down with Little Brown to decide on the final rollout of the book. That book is about, I call it, one section I call it the birthplace of Reconstruction on the riverbank in Beaufort, South Carolina. So I decided that all this should be captured into one big tourism attraction. So we gave birth to the South Carolina National Heritage Corridor. We gave birth to the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor. We gave birth to the Southern Campaign of the American Revolution Heritage Corridor. And alongside of that, we created the Congaree National Park. We created the Reconstruction Era National Park. We created the Fort Sumter, Fort Moultrie National Parks. Today, South Carolina has 3 national parks. Do you know that over 500,000 people plan their vacations every year around national parks? That's the way they plan their vacations. So we now have 3 national parks. We got 3 heritage corridors, and all 6 of those entities, those tourism entities, they've got one thing in common. All 6. One thing in common. They were all sponsored by yours truly. Every one of those were my bills. Why? Because I knew that South Carolina's future was not in textiles or tobacco. The tourism will be outnumbered. What do you think has made Charleston the biggest go-to city in the world by some estimations? Tourism. Now, the reason I point this out, because there's a big thing going on. They just passed a bill in the South Carolina legislature attacking something they call DEI. Well, my father grew up in Kershaw County. He went to college for 3 years. he did not graduate from college because after his third year, he was called into the office and was told they were going through his records in preparation for graduation. And they noticed they did not have a record of his high school diploma. And according to state law, you could not get a college degree unless you produce your high school diploma. Well, he could not produce a high school diploma because in Kershaw County, when he was growing up, the state of South Carolina did not allow education for blacks beyond the 7th grade. So he went and studied on his own, and he got to the point that he could pass a college entrance exam. That's how he got to college. And he never, well, I shouldn't say never, 20 years after he died, the college awarded him his degree because they did not give it to him, because state law would not allow them to give him his degree. State law did not allow him an education beyond the 7th grade. So what do we do about this? Sit back and not deal with the impact of that? Or do we come together and decide that we are going to do the things that are necessary to overcome that? And you might say, well, that's in the past. Well, let me show you why it ain't. Look at this picture. You know what this is? This picture is at a little place in Camden, South Carolina. That house, you've all seen it. If you go by there, you see all this Revolutionary War stuff in that yard. And this is blasting off this heritage corridor that we call the Southern Campaign for we didn't put American in it, and I regret not doing that. The group came up with the name. I let it stay what they had it. So they don't call it the Southern Campaign of the American Revolution. They call it the Southern Campaign of the Revolution, which I think is a misnomer, which I think is a bad thing, but we let it go. So on the day they decided to blast us off, this house is about 6 blocks from the school I graduated from. I graduated from school, Mather Academy in Camden, South Carolina. While we were there, we took about 100 or 200 pictures that day. But this is the official picture that they've put out. This is the 5th District Congressman. This is the 7th District Congressman. They had nothing to do with the bill. The 6th District Congressman, if you look real close, if you can walk behind this guy, there he is. Of 100, 200 pictures, this is the picture that they publish as the picture from that. Now, the history of this, in 2005, John Spratt joined me in proposing legislation to create a study of the capability of doing this. The study went on, and in 2006 was the study. And then he introduced the legislation. The study came back, said, yeah, this is a good idea. The stuff you got is all legitimate. It's eligible. So we introduced the legislation, and it got passed in 2019. Count the years. 2005 to 2019. That's how long it took me to get this bill passed. And on the day we blasted it off, they decided to use this picture. You can see these guys real well. It's my bill. What do you call that? They knows who built that was. I worked with him for those 20 years to do it. But this is the official picture. If that's not whitewashing history, what is it? So when I go to the floor, as I did last night, and I see somebody over there pontificating, outright lying about what the history is, then you ask, where are we? Is all that way back yonder? No. This is what's taking place right now in South Carolina. That's what this is all about. Now, I'll just introduce you to my grandson-in-law. He and my granddaughter, the pediatrician, have a daughter. My question is, what's the future? Will Eden, their daughter, Jennifer's granddaughter, my great-granddaughter, will Eden continue to live where her granddad is now living? Now, I don't hold any of this against anybody in this room. All I'm saying is the people of ill will are making pretty good use of their time, putting out pictures like this, while the people of goodwill remain silent. The people of ill will are still trying to stop development in rural communities. I know what's going to, how much soybeans? What's going to happen to all those soybeans you're growing in South Carolina when we finish with whatever we're going through, and when China says, how much of the soybeans do we sell to China?
Probably 40%.
40% of the soybeans that we grow in South Carolina.
Oh, like South Carolina, I'm not sure in the country. About 40.
40% in the country. What's going to be the future of these farmers? While the people of goodwill stay silent. I'm not too sure that we're going to be rewarded justly if we do not speak out against this foolishness that's going on in this great country. We don't need to be made great. We are great. What we've got to do is come together and decide whether or not we are going to make the greatnesses of this country accessible and affordable for all of our citizens. Thank you. If y'all got any questions, I'll gladly answer them. I'm good until 10 o'clock. Yeah.
Congressman, good morning. Michael Hacker, Clyburn Alumni Association. I was struck by your comment about vision.
What?
Your comments about vision, having the vision. And when you set this organization up more than 15 years ago, it was for moments like this, for South Carolina business community to come together with political leaders on a monthly basis and talk about the South Carolina economy and what's best for the state. Your comments at the top touched on it. I think South Carolina is probably in the top 10, if not number 1, in the most trade-exposed states in the union. In your tenure in Congress, you turned South Carolina, you helped turn South Carolina into a global export machine. And it's a moment of crisis right now. What advice do you have for the business leaders in this room to carry back to the state to help our country make better decisions?
Look, I talk to her a lot. I don't wait for there to be a crisis to talk to her. I talk to many of you in this room. I'm not going to call names. I don't want to get anybody excommunicated. But when I wrote my memoir, was published 10 years ago this year. I said in the introduction to that book, all of my experiences have not been pleasant, but I've considered all of them to be blessings. And among some of those blessings, the experiences I've had with Governor McMaster. Now, I don't want to get him into trouble, so don't y'all hold this against. He and I talk a lot. We don't agree on anything politically. We don't talk politics, partisan politics. And I shouldn't say politics, because everything we do together is in fact political. And we were trying to get the broadband bill passed. I don't know if y'all kept up with that. But in order to get that bill passed, the money for that bill, I went to a meeting and I said to the folks in the meeting, I said, let me tell you something. How many of you all remember what we call the interstate highway when it first came on board? You remember the interstate highway? The interstate highway came with Eisenhower. So when the internet was first conceived, it was sort of mimicked the interstate highway. And it was called the information highway. Before I ever knew anything about internet, I knew what the information highway was. So I said in this meeting, I said, you know, we're talking about doing this infrastructure bill. I'm not going to stand by and watch an infrastructure bill go through this House and we not deal with infrastructure in the broadest possible sense. And we must treat the information highway the same way that we treat the interstate highway. They're both infrastructure. And on January 6th, when I was sitting in this so-called undisclosed location, the very first phone call I got was from Henry McMaster. And Henry said to me, are you all right? I said, yes, I'm fine. He said, well, I'm going to be doing my State of the State address. I think it was the next day. And I'm going to call for the state to fund, and this is his exact quote, your broadband program. And that's started the relationship. And today, South Carolina, the study said we needed $650 million to build out broadband 100% in South Carolina. Guess what? We got over $800 million sitting there for broadband in South Carolina. We're going to build it out, and we're going to be able to put some bells and whistles onto it, and we are going to be able to go from 5G to whatever other Gs they may come up with to working together. So the visionary kind of relationship, and that's what we've done. We've got a hub. Who's here from the Department of Commerce in South Carolina? Anybody from the Department of Commerce? Harry Lysa was up here. Oh, you brought Harry. Yeah.
Thank you for being on the appropriations committee too.
We just did, $40 million for the new hub. What was it? For the new hub in South Carolina with McMaster and I working. So the visionary stuff is step outside your comfort zones. I mean, you know, when I was teaching school, I taught that the most prolific inventor in the history of this country was Thomas Edison. That was in the textbooks that I had. But what was not in the textbooks that I had was the fact that Thomas Edison couldn't get that light bulb to work until he sat down with a guy named Louis Latimer, who had invented the filament. Louis Latimer was the son of former slaves. His parents had escaped from slavery, living up in Massachusetts. Thomas Edison stepped out of his comfort zone up in New Jersey, went up to Massachusetts, sat down with Louis Latimer, and got permission to put Latimer's filament into his light bulb. That's how the thing works. So why is it so uncomfortable for a child sitting in the classroom to learn about Louis Latimer, but not uncomfortable to learn about Thomas Edison? What is this about? Probably the same reason we got this picture like this. Look, this country is teetering on an autocracy. But I don't care what you say about it, that's what it is. If you've studied as many history books as I've studied, and then a day goes by when I don't study some history, this country is teetering on autocracy. I had thought one time this morning to talk about a guy named Ernest Everett Just. Y'all may not know anything about Everett Just, but I know a whole lot about him. He was born in Charleston. Ernest Everett Just was known as the Apollo of science. He was known. Native Charlestonian, finished high school at South Carolina State, became a founder of the fraternity that I'm a member of, Omega Psi Phi fraternity, and was the very first recipient of the NAACP's Spingarn Medal. The Apollo of science, captured by the Nazis and put in prison, a black guy from Charleston, South Carolina. And guess what? PhD in science, I think University of Chicago, I believe. Couldn't get a job anywhere because he was black. Is that DEI? What is that? That's not behind us. We are beginning to face the same thing today. And every time I think about this, the history, and where we are, and here's this guy from Charleston, South Carolina, imprisoned by the Nazis. He was imprisoned in 1940, died in 1941. I have no idea what happened to him in prison, but he died a year later. Visionary leadership. And so my whole thing about South Carolina, a place that I love dearly, I said to my 3 daughters, I don't care where you go to school, but if you want me to pay for it, you got to go to school in South Carolina. Didn't have to do that for my granddaughter because she didn't care whether or not I paid for the school. But I love the state. All of us got big vested interests in the state of South Carolina. And I think that we ought to be able, on occasion, to step outside of our comfort zones. I had to do it, some of you remember Emily, my late wife. Emily passed a little over 5 years ago after a 30-year battle with diabetes. Emily grew up on a little farm in Berkeley County. Our backgrounds were totally different. I didn't know anything about farm life. I didn't know what it was like to walk 2.5 miles to school every day. I didn't know what it was like to, as you walk along those dusty roads in the summer, rainy roads, when the rains come, and watch white kids drive by on school buses. I didn't know what I never had that experience. I grew up 3 blocks from my elementary school on a paved street in Sumter, South Carolina, 6 blocks from my middle school. And I'm a graduate of Mather Academy, that we called the boarding school in those days, where my dormitory was like 25 steps from my academic hall. So I didn't know what that experience was. But I found out. early. And I found out early that if we were going to have a successful relationship, a successful marriage, I had to make some adjustments. I had to learn what Gullah Geechee. That's how I became so endeared to the Gullah Geechee Heritage Carter. Because I would hear her and her mother talk on the telephone, and I couldn't understand what the hell they were saying. So I had to learn, because they might be talking about me. So I had to learn the culture. It didn't take anything out of me to learn the Gullah Geechee culture. It led for a good relationship with my mother-in-law and my father-in-law, both of whom were like second parents to me. Because I didn't look upon their culture as being something of a subculture. I looked upon their culture as being something I needed to learn and be a part of. And we became one happy family. And to this day, those in-laws are very close to me. I don't have anything in Charleston, but I invite all those in-laws to be there on my dime. Because I want to see a future for South Carolina that everybody can feel a part of. I want to see industry come. I want to see more homes built in Santee. Now, there are a lot of people coming in there. Ain't gonna know who Jim Clyburn is, and they'll probably vote for my opponent. But that's all right. I'm gonna get more votes than my opponent. So, yes, ma'am.
Changing the subject a little bit, wanting to flag for everyone that the Michelin Guide announced that South Carolina will be covered later this year. So they're going to announce Michelin star restaurants in the state. And thank you for your efforts to bring economic development to this state that actually brought, I think, the culinary scene to a level where it could receive such a designation. And we're expected to bring even more economic development because of the Michelin Guide. So thank you for your efforts.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Well, no other questions. Let me thank all of you for being here today and for tolerating this. But as I said, I had planned, when I was sitting on the plane yesterday, sitting next to Harry, I had thought, I was thinking about something totally different to say today. But then last night, when I listened to gentleman on the floor totally misrepresent everything that this country says is about, totally, absolutely just lying about stuff. And I thought about King's letter. I consider that man to be a person of ill will. And I know it's being a little bit selfish, but I consider myself to be a person of goodwill. And I just thought that I needed to talk today about those two warring factions that seem to be so pronounced in our country today and in our state. And so those of you who came looking for something else, I apologize. Those of you who came looking for Jim Clyburn, you got it.